Welcome to the Honest Money Show. Thanks to our sponsor Bitaroo for making today's episode possible, Australia's biggest Bitcoin-only exchange. John, I have waited to call you John. Welcome.
Thank you, Annie. And you're great to be with you. And congratulations on getting getting your new podcast up and running.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the support from the community, I never would have done it because there were so many moments that I wanted to back out, and it was everyone's spirit that carried me through.
Got to push through it.
Yep. Yep. So I wanted to chat to you about, I noticed that on your social media, you posted recently that you did a talk at a crypto event. I wanted to know how that went.
I did. So originally I was contacted by a young member of the University of New South Wales Cryptocurrency Club. I apologise, I haven't got the exact words of the acronym correct, but you get the idea. They don't, most of these, this is probably true of all universities, and it's been true of people outside of our Bitcoin community for a long time, is that they're almost allergic to the word Bitcoin. And so they're always using the word crypto, which means that they can then really what they end up talking about is really nothing to do with Bitcoin at all. It's all of these other kind of Rube Goldberg machines and other things that rode on Bitcoin's coattails, pretending to be innovative and useful and claiming to have the features that Bitcoin has, but doesn't. But anyway, he got in touch with me. I think it was basically through Bitcoin Alive and my role in that. And I'd spoken to him before, just before Bitcoin Alive, and I'd managed to sort of essentially explain what Bitcoin was to him. And he very quickly, smart guy, very quickly understood how much he'd essentially been deceived by the whole blockchain crypto type narrative, and that Bitcoin was the far more interesting thing to be looking at. And so he and a few of his friends from the university crypto group came to Bitcoin Alive, saw my talk there, and more recently he got in touch with me and said that there's an event that they're running there. It was in combination with in conjunction with a new Bitcoin exchange that's launching locally, and wanted me to be the speaker there. And so, and essentially, you know, he knows what I'm all about. It's no mystery that I would be there to talk about Bitcoin, and actually to also make sure that I highlighted those differences. And so going along to that, I kind of had expectations that be some a degree of apprehension or a degree of wailing and gnashing of teeth, as I put in the tweet, about some of the things that I would be saying about Bitcoin as opposed to, and about crypto, which wouldn't be necessarily particularly flattering towards the crypto side. But before I even gave the talk, the people I spoke to there were very receptive to the message. In fact, even the Ethereum speaker admitted that, I love Bitcoin. I've got way more Bitcoin than Ethereum. And so it's almost as though, and this is a big change from my years in this space, because it's not the first time I've spoken to crypto people. In fact, although I've never sort of really like traded shitcoins and all of that sort of thing, I did when the narrative first emerged of these alternative things, I did go along to blockchain and crypto type events to see what it was all about. Now, I never found any of it convincing, because I'd already understood the game theory behind Bitcoin and why trying to change that wouldn't work. But I nevertheless went along and would often speak to a great many crypto, quote unquote, crypto people. But they were still back then much more, way more sure of themselves and way more argumentative, I think, and way more defensive of their position than what I found this group of people to be when I went and gave my talk. Even the exchange, admittedly, it wasn't a Bitcoin only exchange. This was essentially a crypto exchange, and they knew they had my slides. To their credit, I mean, they didn't object to what I would be saying. I did do another talk at another group a few months ago. It was at a golf club where there was a degree of apprehension from the crypto exchange sponsor, who wanted me to refrain from saying anything negative about crypto. We managed to figure out a good compromise there. But this exchange, no, they didn't try to they didn't try to lean on me or put any pressure on what I should say. And whether or not, I should, back down from my, Bitcoin maximalist message. Nothing like that. I gave the talk, and as I said already before I even gave the talk, people were like, as things that are sort of like common knowledge almost among the Bitcoin community are not common knowledge among the crypto communities. It's fun, and it doesn't take long to sort of start putting some of the fundamentals of Bitcoin to them, and they come to see why the crypto narrative is very misguided and ultimately isn't working. Not that I can say that it won't work, but now after like 7 or 8 years of this narrative going on, I can say it isn't working. Every narrative they've tried has failed, and I think now the general impression I took away, and what a couple of other Bitcoiners that came along and supported me, Catan, Marcus, they were like also struck by just how it was almost like a degree of capitulation there was in the whole, as I keep using that expression, that narrative has really is just not what it was, and for good reason. I mean, like, how long can people keep getting absolutely like curb stomped by reality until you just have to accept that it is what it is?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's so funny because as you were speaking, was reminding myself of there's a tweet that says, "How do you know which side is in the right?" And then, or which side is telling the truth? It's like usually the side that's not trying to censor the other party is
Right?
is
Yeah.
speaking the truth. Yeah. But it's interesting. I had no idea that the crypto community has thinks of like, Bitcoin as a dirty word. I know that in the
Well, I
Bitcoin
don't. I mean,
community we
maybe
don't
that's.
like the word
I
crypto,
use that
but
expression. I mean, it's just that they
yeah,
seem to just like they can't bring themselves to use it. And I'm trying. And whenever I talk to them, I always try to break them out of the habit by sort of correct. It sounds like I'm being pedantic, but it's a very important distinction, which I think we in the Bitcoin community all understand very well, but they don't. And so they keep, even when they're describing what it is that I'm there to talk about, they keep saying crypto, and I keep having to correct them back into saying,
yeah,
no, it's Bitcoin. And yeah, I know, like, and people could argue that, yes, taxonomically, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, and that's what crypto is short for. But we don't call other human beings animals, even though taxonomically human beings are part of the animal kingdom. Um, we only use the word animals when we're talking about, all of the non-human animals. If we're talking about people, we just say people. And therefore, if you're talking about crypto, well, what you're really then wanting to talk about is all this extra shit, and all that extra shit doesn't matter. Only Bitcoin matters, and therefore Bitcoin is the only word you need to use.
yep, yep. Well, I've had a lot of guidance from the start from Bitcoin maximalists, so I avoided that whole crypto saga altogether, and um, I'm interested to know, I guess, how do I say this? So in my mind, ultimately, I was thinking about this last night, and I think that maybe the crypto necessarily wasn't a bad thing because early on in the day, in the Bitcoin days, people, didn't really understand the protocol very well. They didn't understand technology very well, and they sort of thought that the slowness of Bitcoin is a bug, and they wanted to, see if they can make an improvement on it. So is it almost like it's not until you try to improve and realize that it fails spectacularly
Well,
that you
the thing
realize,
is that, yeah, I get what you're saying, but
yeah,
the thing is none of that was ever really true. I mean, what the crypto people actually did is made that whole situation worse. They spread that misunderstanding. They amplified it. In fact, they essentially traded on ignorance of Bitcoin in order to push their alternative solutions. It was never a particularly, no, I mean, in some cases people might have been genuinely, misguided, but no, there were deliberate, disingenuous attempts to muddy the waters, not clarify anything. And so the crypto community itself, or at least the leaders in that community, were themselves responsible for a great deal of that confusion. Because what they never admitted was that, yeah, they would say things like Bitcoin is slow because it can only do 7 transactions per second. But our blockchain can do this many thousands of transactions per second. But of course, that just leaves you open to some other blockchain coming along and saying, well, we can do 100,000 or a million. It's like that thing in the hitchhiker scene in There's Something About Mary, where the 8-minute abs, and then the guy says, well, what about if someone comes up with 7-minute abs? Then what are you going to do? And the guy the hitchhiker just glitches out. He can't, blows a fuse, can't deal with it. But that's kind of like the thing here. What they don't tell you, though, when they say that thing about Bitcoin, is they don't admit to the trade-offs that their own project had to make in order to get that extra number of transactions per second. And what they ended up trading off was the most important thing, the very thing that made Bitcoin unique in the first place. There's nothing particularly unique about being able to do millions of transactions a second. The fiat system does millions of transactions per second perfectly fine. We don't need something else that can do transactions at that speed. But what we did need, and this is the problem that Bitcoin actually solved, was to be able to actually create consensus in a network without a trusted third party. But what these guys and these projects are doing, because they are necessarily centralized projects, they have CEOs, they have marketing departments, they have budgets and all these sorts of things. They put that central third party right back in there. And all the whole time, it's not as though the Bitcoin community has been under any illusions that somehow we're going to build a whole financial system with only 7 transactions per second. But the way in which, and this is the other thing, the crypto community doesn't seem to they keep, although whether or not they're going to still keep doing that due to what I said before, but for years they've always tried to pretend as though things like the Lightning Network doesn't exist, which is the Bitcoin solution to the scaling problem. So you keeping the bottom layer of the protocol sacrosanct, that is those features that you can't get anywhere else, the trustless decentralization that I talked about before, but then doing the scaling on a level above that, so you can make your compromises there without compromising the lower level, and so you can kind of in that way, because blockchains have that trilemma where you have to make a compromise somewhere, and so Bitcoin is choosing to make its compromise on the Bitcoin blockchain, makes its compromise in scaling, but then essentially farms that out to the layer above. But again, in the crypto community, to bring it back, they're either unaware of that, or if they are aware, they conveniently pretend as though it doesn't exist so that they can keep pushing their narrative as being a faster, as a faster blockchain. Because a lot of the whole reason for these things existing is to address some kind of perceived deficiency in Bitcoin, perceived or fabricated deficiency in many cases in Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's interesting because if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, it's almost like there were Bitcoiners all along, very early on, who had the foresight that none of these projects were going to work.
Yeah,
I'm more of a hindsight person and think like, oh, great, we tested this with this and now it doesn't work and we know not to go back to that. But it's interesting that there have been people all along who had the foresight to see Bitcoin for what it is.
The Bitcoin amazing. Technical experts, the people that have been who'd been working on this stuff even before Bitcoin existed, all understood that Bitcoin was a very, very carefully balanced set of components with very carefully devised game theory that you couldn't just pluck bits out of and hope would somehow work on their own or with completely different sets of incentives and parameters, because that's the key thing there. Bitcoin at the end of the day is just a bunch of incentives that work really, really well together, essentially addressing tragedy of the commons type problems. So for those listeners that might not be familiar with the tragedy of the commons problems, they are problems whereby the interests of the individual actor do not align well with the interests of the community overall, and it comes from the idea of a shared common grazing area, and all of the participants that were grazing cattle or sheep or whatever it was on that area would agree that they would put no more than 10 animals into the space, because if people were just able to put as many animals as they wanted into the space, it would overgraze the area and destroy the land for everybody. So by all agreeing to only maybe put a maximum of say 5 or 10 or whatever it is on there, then the land wouldn't get ruined. However, as a selfish individual, you could say, particularly if there were like, dozens of other farmers, you could sort of push that number up. If you just put 20 on there and everyone else is following the rules, presuming everyone else is following the rules, the land will probably be okay, but you'll get to graze twice as many cattle. So it's in your interest to try to get as many cattle on there as possible. But that doesn't align with the interests of the group overall. So, but Bitcoin, on the other hand, again, all the incentives is like everything is looked at as how do we align everything? How do we make it so that everything that happens in the way the network works only has to trust that all of the participants in that network are going to behave in their most rational self-interest.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still absolutely baffled. The more I learn about Bitcoin's design, the more I just can't believe that a single person or a group of people, whoever it was, designed something so pristine. And yeah, like it just works. It
It
just
does, and
works.
and that's the thing. You mentioned the hindsight thing before. It's
Mm,
so many people have tried to like change little bits and then realize later on, oh, that's why Satoshi did it that way. I see now, because they actually had to do it and watch it fail. Whereas Satoshi, whoever he or they were, was very, very prescient in being able to sort of almost game out how all of these things would go. It's also important to remember that as elegant as it is, it's not like it wasn't invented sort of whole cloth in 2008 and 2009 being when the first block was mined. It wasn't invented whole cloth. There's a whole history of technology that going right back to you can go back as far as you want, but in terms of computing, at least, it's the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, different things like different kinds of encryption protocols. Proof of work was something that existed beforehand. I first remember hearing about that as a form of spam mitigation, whereby every piece of email you got, it wouldn't be accepted, except if it could show cryptographically that a certain amount of computational power had been expended, and that would mean that if you just want to send a few emails, the amount of computation would be trivial. But if you were sending bulk email, then that would really add up to some significant amount of computational power that would have to be you would have to prove you did, and that would then throttle that back any spammer's ability to send out billions of email messages. That was around like 2000, 2001. Blockchain, that came, and this is the thing about blockchain. That was the big buzzword in 2017. Blockchain was around in, I think, 1991. It was a paper by Harber and Stornetta, proposed how you could get a chunk of data and then basically do a thing called a hash, which takes like a unique number from that you can't reversibly calculate. Add that to the next block. The idea being is that if you tried to change any data in that system, you'd have to change like everything that came later. And that is very, very difficult to do if you combine that with proof of work, because then you have to do all of the proof of work calculations for every block. Where it doesn't work is on its own, because you could trivially change all of the data that's stacked on top if you don't have to do any proof of work calculations in the process. A computer could very easily, if you want to change something that in the database that was put there years ago with thousands of blocks on top, you can very easily recompute all of the blocks that sit on top. But if you've got proof of work there that require 10 minutes of calculations of the combined computing power of thousands of miners all over the world, then that you can't even roll one block back, let alone dozens or hundreds that you might need if you wanted to change something that occurred earlier on in the history.
yeah. I
So
love
this
that you
is the
said
thing.
that. Yeah,
Sorry.
I love that you said that, JP, because as you were speaking, I was smiling because I remembered I recently saw on Instagram Mark Boris did a podcast with the CEO of a crypto exchange in Australia. And I noticed in the notes that he said it was a paid partnership. I found that very
Mhm.
interesting. But I just watched this short little sound bite, and from what I could see, the message was very much that blockchain is a technology that allows for decentralization of finance. And I'm like, No, 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 no,
No,
no, no, no.
no.
There's yeah, no, no. This is the
No.
problem.
Yeah.
Yep. And I couldn't help myself, so I commented just to clear up the confusion for any people who stumble upon it and may want to know that there is a little bit more that requires for us to achieve
Well, and not only
decentralization
that, I
than
mean, you
just
have to ask as well as if this blockchain again, without Bitcoin's proof of work and without a whole lot of this other stuff, if it was so revolutionary, why didn't anyone do anything with it between 1991 and the development of Bitcoin in 2008? Yeah,
yeah.
it just becomes then an idiosyncratic data structure. That's it. An append only database, not that useful.
Yep.
And when they talk about, but it allows us, you can have this, we can have this system where the data is all decentralized around. We already have that. I mean, when you log on to your social media, that is stored simultaneously on servers all over the world. A nuke could take out a country holding part of that infrastructure, and you'll still be able to log in. It'll fail over to another copy of the data, and the system will reroute around the problem. So there's nothing new about a decentralized database, but it is ultimately blockchain, and this is kind of gets back to the presentation I did at the university. It was one of the early marketing buzzwords. Essentially, it really became. It's really more of a marketing term than it is any
It's
kind
still
of
around.
rigor. Well, yeah, but it's kind of metastasized into other things. Like there was sort of then it was blockchain, and then it was sort of rebranded last cycle to DeFi, and now they're calling it Web3. Because that's ultimately what the topic of the thing that I went and spoke at last week was essentially a Web3 day, and so I sort of rather cheekily titled my presentation, "Why Bitcoin is the only blockchain with a cross out through it, crypto with a cross out through it, a bunch of other, and then I think it was DeFi with a cross out through it, and then Web3 that matters." In other words, to show how this is just the latest iteration of a whole series of marketing terms that have come and gone as each of the narratives that were associated with that marketing term have failed in the market. Although, of course, it didn't fail in the market for everybody. It just failed. It just failed in the market for everyone that system claimed to care about. It worked very well for a few insiders that created tokens and spun up like things like venture capital pump, like what is it with these serial entrepreneur types that all they ever do is like continually spin up ideas, but they can't wait to flog them off. And it's almost as though they build these things for that purpose. It's not really built with any kind of long-term vision, and they know it. They're building this thing to be something that they can flog off to either to raise, the venture capitalists can flog off to mud punters, to retail. And this time, really, retail isn't really showing up at the moment, because the narratives have gotten kind of sillier and sillier. In the beginning, there was a degree of sort of, if you didn't scratch too deeply, there was a degree of plausibility to the narratives. But what's the latest thing now? It's just like meme coins is all they're left with. They just literally call them meme coins. I mean, at least that's more honest. At least you can just say, yeah, look, we've given up. They've given up on any pretense of these things being useful. You are just buying a meme. That's it. And now we see how there's like the same curve of that those things. They get pumped by the insiders. They start selling. Boom, dump. Rinse and repeat. There's no. There was never any kind of long-term view with any of this stuff, and that's what Bitcoiners have been very good at doing. Bitcoiners are here for the long term, and this is reflected as well in our meetup numbers. It used to be that during bear markets, when it was all just sort of when there was no Bitcoin crypto distinction, is that everyone would show up in massive numbers. Like you could get hundreds of people at these meetups during the bull markets, and then as soon as a few months later, when the bear market was around, literally we'd be like 5 people, if that. Like it would just drop to nothing. With the Bitcoin community now, our events are equally well attended, and regardless now of what part of the cycle that we're in,
Yeah.
because we're here for the
Consistency
long
is
term. We're here
key.
for what's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you if you can simply explain, like, I think there's a lot of people in Northern Rivers area that are sort of dabbling in crypto space, and I do get this question a lot. Um, Bitcoin versus crypto. How would you explain it to a complete beginner as to why they should not be investing in crypto?
One of the interesting distinctions, I think, I think it's a very clear distinction you can join, is to draw rather, is to ask to ask of all of these things, including Bitcoin, what problem does it solve? Now, Bitcoin, right from the very first, in fact, the problem that it solves is embedded in the very first Bitcoin block itself. Satoshi put it in there. He says, you've seen that line that says, governor on the brink of second bailout for banks. Okay, so what's the problem there? Is that money printing, right? This idea that insiders can keep breaching the trust of the monetary system by printing money to bail out their friends at the expense of everybody who holds that money, who gets diluted. All these other guys take the risks. I earned my money, I hold my money, and I'm just getting diluted by these people that took risks and don't seem to have to suffer the consequences when that risk goes wrong because their mates at the money printer are going to print more of them and bail them out. So that's embedded in the blockchain. As well as that, he also writes in some very early posts, he explicitly says the problem with traditional fiat currency is the amount of trust that it requires in central third parties, and I'm paraphrasing, and how history is full of repeated breaches of that trust. You
That's
couldn't
actually
define the
pretty
problem more
close.
clearly.
Yeah, that's pretty actually close to the original quote. So you did really well remembering that.
Yeah, so you couldn't define the problem more clearly. So start out with a problem. Now, here's the solution. And by the way, it wasn't the first attempt at such a solution. There were precursors to Bitcoin, which indeed involved many of the same technological components. Just that Bitcoin was the first one to kind of to get everything decentralized. Like there was things before that had attack vectors still, like certain central attack vectors that the legacy system could go for and take down. And it's kind of like what happened with file sharing in the very early days. Some of your older listeners would remember things like Napster. And that was pretty much completely, well, it had a big centralized server. You'd
I'm
connect,
old enough to remember
the other guy would
Napster.
connect, but there was a central kind of mediating server. And that, of course, as soon as that was shut down. And then there were ones that sort of took more of the central points out of it. And eventually it got to what we have. It didn't take long. It all happened within a few years. BitTorrent. And so the only things that now can get taken down are like the websites that hold the actual like torrent link. But you could just have those, people could just hold those, like you could have those links everywhere. You could keep putting those links around as long as you can send those links around. The data now just moves between all of the peers in the network in a totally decentralized swarm. And that's why we still have BitTorrent to this day. That protocol is essentially the underpinnings of still of all online file sharing. And we're going back, 25 years here now. And so
That
Bitcoin is
long.
kind of like the equivalent of BitTorrent, except now for money. It took out it was the thing that no longer had anything in it left that could be attacked and prevented from working. I forget what the beginning of the question was. Where did I go off? What was the start of that?
Yeah, we're talking about crypto versus Bitcoin and
Right,
the
that's all right. The
why.
problem that it
Yeah.
solved. So it solved that problem, and once it was solved, it was solved. Now the thing with crypto is that they're always, it's like they've got this solution, they've got this blockchain tech. Is what it is, and they're always trying to find, what's a problem that this could solve. And they have even hackathons that attempt to sort of come up with problems that you could solve with it. And it's the complete wrong way you should do things. It's and of course that's why all of these things fail, because these were never problems. And so when you're looking at these things, you have to ask yourself, what problem is it actually solving? So when
Yeah.
someone comes up and says, "Oh, look, we could have a virtual cat on the internet, and I can sell this cat, and I can feed this cat, and I can do all this." Okay, well that's nice, but like, What problem
Yep.
is it solving?
Yep.
And
I
then
think
they
most
say, well,
people.
okay. And then there's things like these things have been put forward as digital collectibles. Well, they could solve the. Well, I don't know that collectibles were a problem that needed solving, but one thing about collectibles I can tell you, if you look at my background here, I know little bit about collecting, is that if you try to create something for the purposes of being a collectible, it's never collectible. Think of your grandmother's Franklin Mint plates, or royal crockery, all of that sort of stuff that was explicitly created to be collectible. It never is, because there's what is collectible is things that were sort of relatively normal use, but then become scarce, and people then want to study the history of whatever that thing is, and
Yep.
collect examples of it. But Franklin Mint stuff, that's the good example of that. Those things are just, there's no limit. There's no what's the word? It's I forget the expression now, but it's the idea that you can't fake the amount of effort that went into creating it.
Start saving in Bitcoin with Bitaroo, Australia's biggest Bitcoin-only exchange. Bitaroo offers easy tools and advanced features. Join thousands of happy users making their first Bitcoin purchase today. Download the app or visit bitaroo.com.au.
When you mentioned collectibles, I was just thinking, I feel like the bullish case for Bitcoin has become a collectible, because when I went to buy the book, it's like $600 or something. I was like, you can't buy it for cheap.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
Yeah, like, or
it's
maybe it's just
because
where
that
I'm
book was never
looking.
created to be collectible, but no, that's right. It wasn't created to that. But now that Bitcoin has become popular,
Yeah.
and and that's from a time when Bitcoin wasn't that well known. They didn't print that many copies. People that are interested in Bitcoin might want to complete their Bitcoin library with that book. Perfect example of stuff that becomes collectible because it was never intended. If it was intended to be collectible from the start,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been addressing any real problem. That's for one thing,
Yeah.
and there probably wouldn't be any reason why you couldn't just create unlimited numbers of the thing.
Yeah. Which is also kind of like the same reason why there will never be another Bitcoin. You can't replicate the events that took place to make it what it is today.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's described as Bitcoin's immaculate conception, in that
Yeah.
the whole purpose of Bitcoin was resistance to replicability, and so if you can't therefore if you replicate the whole thing, then you no longer have digital scarcity. Either you're going to have a world in which the idea of digital scarcity exists, or you don't. Now, if you do have that world, and that's the world that we're betting on, then there can only be one. Because if there are more, you don't have digital scarcity anymore, in which case, well, then you may as well not be involved in any of them. So
Yeah.
it becomes essentially a Bitcoin or nothing argument.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when people are looking at the differences here, it's necessary to understand what problem it's solving, how it solves it, and the game theory involved with that, which isn't present in crypto. It's also, you have to look at Bitcoin's immaculate conception, which again, no, cryptos do not have that. They're created by central parties that issue unlimited numbers of tokens, and usually they just sell those to the public. So there's no unforgeable costliness there. They're highly centralized. They can make claims of immutability, like as Ethereum claims that its monetary policy is now makes it more scarce than Bitcoin. You might have heard this claim. With our monetary policy now puts our issuance rate at a better stock to flow ratio than what Bitcoin is. But that's meaningless if your monetary policy itself is not immutable, and it's gone through more changes of monetary policy than its founders have probably had changes of underwear. I mean, and so it's not a meaningful claim when
Yeah.
it can be changed as easily as Bitcoin, as Ethereum, for example. I don't want to pick on Ethereum; it's true of all of them. Have had their monetary policies changed throughout their histories.
Yeah. Plus pre-mine.
Well, that's right, the pre-mine too, yeah, which 70% pre-mine.
Yeah.
And they only ever, like the Ethereum Foundation, for example, has only ever sold Ethereum. It's not bought it. It's only ever sold it to the public. That's the totally opposite message you get from the Bitcoin community that says that the mission that you want to be on at the moment is understanding that this thing is finite and it's meaningfully finite. It's not just finite because someone said it. It's meaningfully finite, and there is actually no way that anyone can change the numbers of Bitcoin there are. We can divide it into, just before anyone says about Satoshis and all that, you could divide it up into thinner slices, but you can't increase the overall money supply. And so this is a very, very important distinction. And a lot of and again, going back to the sort of talk I gave at the university, a lot of that talk was explaining how all of these great things that I'm telling you about Bitcoin, the crypto of which your group is named after, all these other things, they don't necessarily share any, or certainly not all of those attributes. And it's important that it has all of those attributes. It might have some of them, but in order for it to solve the problem that Bitcoin solves, it needs to have all of them. And indeed, to be a meaningfully decentralized thing that is going to do something better than other technology would do, it needs to have all of those attributes. I'm not against the idea of, yes, you could use blockchain to do, people talk about I could store land titles and things on there. Okay. But the moment you start doing that, you have to bring in, again, third parties. See, with Bitcoin, everything that Bitcoin is on the blockchain. It's purely within the digital realm. If you have your own private keys, then only you're the only one putting information on the blockchain. And the moment you do that, that's it. That's the end of it. You make your transaction, that's it. But if you want to do things like storing land titles or something on the blockchain, yeah, you can store information there. But in order to make that action meaningful, it has to link back with the real world somewhere. You need someone to enforce that contract. So why not just trust that guy to run the whole blockchain? You haven't, because it's like, when you you can say, well, I own this property because I have this ledger entry on this blockchain. Yeah, but that's like saying you own the territory because you own the map.
Yeah.
Like owning that transaction on that blockchain says that you just own them. It only gives you ownership of the map. It has to be enforced in the real world, the ownership of the actual territory. The difference with Bitcoin is that those things are one and the same. The map and territory are the same. There's no separate territory. It's just the map is the thing. I pass you the map, now you have that. You have that economic potential energy to spend wherever you wish. There's no other entities needed to enforce anything that's going on. It's all happening within the digital realm. But that's, again, the big mistake with the game theory and the incentives that the blockchain crowd still doesn't understand. They by linking it in with the real world, they're doing things that where the incentives do not align, like it very importantly aligns in Bitcoin.
Yeah. I do want to ask you more about game theory because I'm very interested. I've never gone down that rabbit hole. But before I do, I just want to sort of go back to the crypto versus Bitcoin debate because I think most normal people who are crypto curious and have an interest in this, like as an investment class, they are looking at making money. Like they're not thinking about what the value proposition, what the purpose of Bitcoin is. They're more thinking how do I make money? And I think a lot of them as well think like, okay, Bitcoin's the most established one, but I'm not going to get the gains in Bitcoin anymore that I might gain in some other speculative token. So I think there's an element of, I guess, greed where they are hoping they're going to get like 17x gains from something else because they know that they can't get that in Bitcoin anymore, or they believe
I
they
mean,
can't.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, not no. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, but remember that when you risk adjust these things, though, it all, in fact, it tips in Bitcoin's favor, in my view, when you risk adjust it, because the thing with these other tokens is, you can, like I'm not going to die. People have made hundreds of X on these things, but that you are if you're going to try to think that you're going to do that, you are competing against people who've got far more insider knowledge than you. They know exactly when the pin's about to be pulled. You don't. And in aggregate, all of the people attempting this are actually down on their money. The reason being is because, think about it for a minute. I mean, the exchange is taking whatever their percentage, their trading fee is, or and the spread. So when you add that up, if you actually put the aggregate of all of those crypto trading people together, they're actually down by a couple of percent because of the trading fees on the exchanges. These are zero-sum or slightly negative-sum games, or at least zero-sum games when you put the exchange in there. And when you between traders, they're actually in aggregate down on their money. And then it gets even worse when you consider that it's only a very, very small percentage of traders that make all of the gains. And everyone else who naively sort of jumped in on the pump, they're the ones that get dumped on. More than 90+% of these people don't make any money, and it all gets concentrated in those few insiders that have advantages that the sort of new people, naive people just sitting at home on their trading platform just don't have. Yeah. So it's a mug's game, really. At the end of the day, like, if you just want to say what these things are, if you just say they're gambling, look, I have relatively libertarian views. I don't think these things should be banned. I'm just in favour of being honest about them and calling them out for what they are. If people want to gamble and they know that's what they're doing, good luck to them. But let's stop pretending that these things are innovative and new and are going to, are going to change the world and all of this. No, they're just gambling. And it is a little bit disappointing then when you see sort of people promoting this idea of gambling. To be honest, there was a degree of that disappointed to hear a little bit one of the speakers there who was, I don't want to call him out. I don't think his motives were nefarious, but he was actually they do now do Bitcoin and / crypto courses at the university now, and it was actually literally one of the professors who was talking about his history of sort of essentially trading these tokens and saying how you can dabble in them and you could wake up your money or wake up broke, And it sort of seemed to be a kind of a sketchy thing at a university to be kind of, I don't know whether he was encouraging it, but even, he certainly wasn't condemning it. He certainly wasn't giving any kind of warning against it. And I sort of felt like saying, well, okay, yeah, you can dabble in this stuff. But, I mean, what's next? I mean, heroin, dabble in that. Drugs, I mean, heroin addiction. I mean, you can dabble in all these sorts of things. I mean, gambling and drugs and all these things are very, very destructive behaviours. Now, gambling might not be as damaging to your physical health as drugs, but it absolutely destroys lives. It destroys families. I mean, it's it just like it and depending on sort of who, to varying degrees, it can be a very, very destructive addiction to many people, particularly, and a lot of this thing, it does attract people with potential gambling addictions. And so I think as responsible people, we should always couch it in those terms. Just make sure that we say, just remind people about how damaging gambling behaviours can be, and that ultimately is what's going on here. Not banning it. We're not trying to tell people what to do. Just be clear about what it really is.
Yeah, because Bitcoin is obviously a lot more predictable and stable than these other tokens.
Yeah, because it has that long-term view. It's not trying to sort of you're not trying to dabble in it just so you can get more of something else.
Yeah,
not
but even then,
person that is involved in crypto ever wants to have more ever wants to own more cum rocket, right? No one is about that. They think that they could. The whole point of it is to buy it and then to dump it at the optimal point at the top, so they can get more fiat or more Bitcoin.
Yeah,
it's true. A lot of these people actually, they do believe in Bitcoin and they try to do it to get more Bitcoin. Who I feel sorry for is that some of these people who think that some of these other tokens have actually got a future, and that's where it gets, and when you've got, and I have nothing but contempt for these sort of influencers that go out, the crypto influencers, and we've had a few of them in Australia. Some of them that have got very big and then have had spectacular falls when they've ended up, huffing too much of their own product and ended up coming undone very badly, leaving huge amounts of debt. And in this particular case that I have in mind, some of your listeners will know who I'm talking about. Investors ripped off, and not to mention they used their sort of prominence to sort of shill tokens. They claim, oh, I'm not getting paid any kind of endorsement or anything like that. But if you've seen these people's communications behind the scenes, there is definite self-interest in there. They do have an allocation of tokens, or they'll talk about things that they've been given an incentive to talk about. The incentives for them align very well as the kind of insiders that I warned about before, who are in the position to dump on you with the very things that they're telling you to buy. Well, they don't tell you to, so they're very careful in the way they do it. They say not financial advice, and then they go on and give a load of financial advice. Yeah, and but ultimately the point I'm getting at here is no one wants, no matter what they say about it, no one ultimately wants to own more of any of this other stuff. It's only a vehicle for getting more of some other thing. And that is also your distinction between what is the Ponzi scheme and what's the actual real money. Because people don't buy Bitcoin just so or some people do. Some people buy Bitcoin, they just want to get more dollars. But the point is, though, that there's a huge number, that there's a vast number of people that are actually using Bitcoin as their unit of account and are trying to accumulate more Bitcoin, because it is finite and they are using it as money. It's not, and therefore it's not a Ponzi scheme, certainly not not in the way these other things are, where they're just trying to get more of something else with it. I don't know anyone who's trying to get more of pretty much any other token you can think of. It's always about how you can trade that thing to get more of either Bitcoin or fiat.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I just forgot what the point I was going to make was. We were talking about earlier on about gambling with these speculative tokens, and then I was just going to make the point that even with Bitcoin, like if you receive advice from a Bitcoiner, it's never to try to time the market or speculate when you're going to reach the top or when you're going to reach the bottom. It's always buy and hold.
The closest you get to it is like dollar cost averaging type of advice, which is the opposite of trying to time the market. It's just use it like you would your savings. It's a savings account. That's all. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's a not get poor slowly scheme, as someone else coined that expression. And so you just treat it like a savings account. It wasn't always something that you could as safely do that with as you can now. I think now that it's reached a size whereby it's not like it's so entrenched now in everything that the prospect of it going to zero is no longer a meaningful one. Like the legacy system has a far greater chance of wiping you out now than Bitcoin does. Yeah. But it could have been argued 10 years ago that you were taking a risk, not necessarily a risk in that this thing was any good. I think anyone who understood it realized that this thing works and solves the problem. But the risk that there wouldn't be a significant number of other people in the world that would come to the same realization. Because you need to have that. If you're going to have money, it has to be something that enough other people are willing to put value into in order for it to hold value for you. If you're going to put your money in there, you have to be able to, ideally, you would want someone else down the line to be able to give you back. So if you've created you've done a certain amount of work, or you've created a certain amount of economic output, and you want to hold that for the future, that economic potential energy, as I describe it, you at least in the future would hope that you could at least get that amount of energy back out of the system to benefit you at some faraway point. Bitcoin, while it's growing, though, is going to do a hell of a lot better than that, because it's still growing. But as long as it does at least that. But if it had never caught on, then and no one had just ever come around to the realization, then you would have essentially lost the economic potential energy that you put in. That's why now when people talk about getting into Bitcoin, they talk about, well, they put all that, they almost put every spare cent they have. Some of the more adventurous people talk about getting loans and that sort of thing. This is not what people said back in the early days. Even the most ardent Bitcoin bulls would say things like, don't invest more than you can afford to lose. It was maybe put in 10%.
Now it's
spare money.
Sailor's got a saying which is the inverse of that. Do you know what it is?
Right, don't keep out of it, or don't keep in fiat more than you can afford to, or don't or that's right. Put in what only
Yep.
put in what you can't afford to lose.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the mindset that I have as well. Like for me, it's a buy and hold, forget I have it, ride the
Yeah.
storms. And then if I get emotional about the drawbacks, reach out to a friendly OG for support.
It's so much easier because in all of these other things, you had to do all this stuff like you got to stake it in order to so that you don't get diluted. And you got to do all these, and you got to keep it in wallets that are far, that typically are online connected. And yeah, so you can't. It can't just be. You can't just simply save your money. You have to jump through all sorts of other hoops to keep because you got to keep trading it or turning it over into the next big thing. This is what they
Yep.
do. Because this is dying, so you got to move it into the next one and the next speculative thing. Meanwhile, Bitcoin's there, just humming along. All you had to do was just buy it. Every shitcoin that ever was, no matter how much they might have made, they still would have done better in the end if they just put that time and effort and money into Bitcoin right from the start. Walked
Yep.
away for 10 years. Go outside. I told the students this. Geez, you guys sitting behind computers because all you're doing is like you're sitting at your computer, the other person sitting at their computer. They're trying to take your money. You're trying to take their money. Nothing's being created here. Just the other guy trying to take the other guy's money. And you spending and how many hours you guys have spent both at each trying to do this. Imagine the number of hours that are spent staring at charts and working out positions and doing all of this when the whole time all you ever had to do was just put your money into Bitcoin, hold the private keys yourself, keep it safe, and just go outside, touch grass, do whatever you got to do, not worry about it.
Find
And
a
you would have
hobby.
done, and you'd have done, in the last, you'd have done 100x in the last, 7 or 8 years. That
Yep.
was, yeah,
Yep.
um,
Yeah.
simple as that. And it can nothing. None of these things ever. These other things, by the way, they all had their peak in 2017. Ethereum is a great chart from James Check pointed out that Ethereum has now been down 73% of all the days that it's existed. It's been in the red 73% of the time against Bitcoin. So there's only something like 27% of the days of Bitcoin of Ethereum's existence that if you'd bought that, you would be ahead on your Bitcoin investment. And
Yep.
and the longer it goes on, the smaller that percentages of days ahead in Ethereum there are, because it's continuing to trend downwards against Bitcoin, as we said it always would, because not only is it sort of essentially trying to solve problems that don't exist, it's also because it's the second and third and fourth or whatever thing along, it has no shelling point around it. There's no reason why you have to remain loyal to if you think that those smart contracts are interesting. Let's say you might genuinely think that there are things that you can do on those platforms. Well, you don't need to do them on Ethereum. As soon as Ethereum gets too expensive, you can do them on numerous other smart contract blockchains like Solana or NEM or whatever. I mean, and these are all coming in there and cannibalizing the same market share of people. So they are genuinely unlimited. That's why they could never ultimately go up, because they just keep getting cannibalized by faster and better smart contract blockchains. Because they're also trying to compete on that tech perspective. I just want to make this other point about the distinction as well. A lot of people make the mistake of looking at this whole thing, looking at Bitcoin in particular, as a tech phenomenon, when it is to some extent, but it's primarily a monetary phenomenon. Now, if you had made the mistake of looking at it as primarily a tech phenomenon, you would have made the false pattern match between Bitcoin and things like the Betamax video recorder. That's probably dating me a bit there, but there's other examples of like when you've had a system that was the earlier one and then gets made obsolete by a better one. And if you looked at it as a tech phenomenon, you would very easily try to say, well, the better one they kept saying is Bitcoin is MySpace and Ethereum or these other things are like, the newer social networks that came along afterwards that were much more successful, where MySpace is essentially irrelevant. That turned out to be, and we always said it was a false pattern match. It was a false analogy.
Yeah.
And it only came about because you were looking at it as a tech phenomenon, because that's what tech does, right? There's like a newer tech that gets better and replaces the older tech. But if you believed that, you would have also had to believe that whatever tech came along to replace Bitcoin would itself get replaced by something else. And that would have just gone on forever, and you'd be back to the point of not having digital scarcity anymore.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what has happened to Ethereum, because the very same arguments that it tried to make against Bitcoin were made against it by these other smart contract blockchains that are going to continue to come along, and there are more of them all the time, that are going to cannibalize its market share. So it's not going to end up being... So all of these things ultimately will trend to zero against Bitcoin. I'm not going to say that they're going to be worthless. There'll always be, in anything, even in the stupidest thing you can imagine, there will always be some diehards that will ascribe some value to it and keep the bid just above zero. But I say they will trend towards zero as Bitcoin continues to be adopted, and these other things continue to essentially cannibalize each other for the fewer and fewer people that remain committed, to whatever they think these things can do for them.
Yeah. Yeah. As a Bitcoin elder, I actually want to ask you on something, because I want to validate if my assumptions or the story that I'm telling myself has merit or it's completely way off. You mentioned that, Bitcoin is a monetary phenomenon, not a tech phenomenon. In my head, I am telling myself the story that up until 2017, the Bitcoin discussions were largely dominated by the tech crowd. And then
Just to
Safety
clarify,
came
I
a
said that
moose.
I'm not saying it's not a tech, but it's just not
Yeah.
primarily a tech phenomenon. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So obviously it involves a great deal of tech,
Yeah.
aligned
But
very carefully.
is
But
it
in
almost
doing
like,
that, it's, yeah.
yeah, is it almost like Safedine came a moose, sorry, Safedine a moose came along and, released the Bitcoin standard and introduced sort of the world to this print, reintroduced the world to um Austrian economics, because it was, in my mind, again, a forgotten science. And then he basically made the case for it. No, this is actually really hard money. This is why this thing is going to succeed. Is that what happened?
Well,
I'm
as,
way
as
off.
influential as Saif Dean's book has been, I wouldn't say suggest that it was the thing that like suddenly crystallized this idea in everyone's mind. Bitcoin from its very beginnings was posited as an Austrian economic system, and that's because of its finite supply. Like, it was designed from the outset with Austrian economic principles in mind uh, that were well known to the earliest of people involved in it. I think some of the early writings of the Mises Institute, like Bitcoin, was spoken about in Austrian economic circles almost from day one.
Yeah.
The contribution Saif Dean made, though, of course, in writing the Bitcoin standard, though, was perhaps popularizing those concepts to the very large number of people that were introduced to those ideas through his book that sold very well. But that was quite a number of years. I'm not sure what year the Bitcoin
I
standard
think
was.
it's 2017. That's vaguely what I remember seeing.
That sounds about right. So
Yeah.
so that's many years after these ideas were
Yeah.
already formed, the solid foundations for not only Bitcoin but also many people's interest in Bitcoin as a monetary
Yeah.
phenomenon.
Yeah, I've never heard of the Austrian economics before I read the Bitcoin standard, so that was a very interesting.
So credit to Saif Dean's book if that's what brought it to you. But it can say though that those ideas were
Yeah,
before that well established in people in the circles of people interested in not only Austrian economics but Bitcoin, and the marriage of the two was appreciated almost from day one.
yeah, nice. I wanted to ask you about game theory. This
Mhm.
is a rabbit hole I've never gone down. How would you explain it to a complete noob?
Oh, I would explain it in terms of people ultimately act on incentives. And the idea here is that you are trying to predict what the other guy is going to do based on what you think he is going to want to do, to maximize his own positive outcomes. It's not very eloquent, but
No, it makes sense.
there's also a sort of second order to that as well, in that an even more sophisticated player in this, because it is a kind of a game, is also going to be not only thinking of what's best for him, but he's also going to be thinking of what he thinks you're going to do, which means that he's also thinking. So it can go back and forth a bit like that as well, and so it's ultimately all of the people in essentially a system optimizing their own outcomes. And there's many different ways you can set up different systems with different rules, and they're going to lead to different outcomes because of the way in which it affects people's behavior, assuming that people in that system are going to be acting according to their own rational self-interest. The whole system breaks down if participants are irrational. So a good example of game theory would be the idea of mutually assured destruction. This is quite topical, I think, like in the last week. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction. The idea is that if we have a whole bunch of people that have got a whole bunch of superpowers that have got nuclear weapons, then it kind of ensures a degree of peace, because no one is going to want to increase the tension to the point where as soon as one country drops a nuclear weapon on the other, then the retaliation will destroy them as well. So no one wants to escalate the situation to the point, because as soon as one person launches a nuke, they're going to get destroyed too, because there's enough power there just to wipe out everybody. And so so what it ends up doing is deterring. That gives them that deterrence from anyone from launching a nuke at all. So you sort of have them, but you don't use them. The having of them kind of prevents people from ever using them. That assumes that the actors are rational. The argument against allowing someone like an Iran to have nuclear weapons is that if you believe that they are a religious theocracy that may believe that the second coming of Christ, or that's not the right word for Islamic theocracy, of course, but if you believe that they are not rational actors, let's just leave it at that. Let's not try to let's not make this theological. Let's just say that if you didn't believe that they were rational actors, then you wouldn't want them holding nukes, because they would bomb you and not necessarily care about the consequences to themselves. So game theory is based on the idea that the actors are rational, that they're going to try to optimize their own outcomes, and so therefore, with knowledge of that and the system, you want to design things in such a way as that it affects you as an individual, as your behavior, as to how you're going to behave in the system, because you're also going to have to think of what the other guy's going to do, but it also affects how you design systems. In terms of, if you want them to work, then you want the interests of all of the individuals in the system to align with what's also best for the system overall. So I refer back to the tragedy of the commons example I gave before, where the systems didn't align very well, and so people would cheat, and so you'd have to then have enforcement to come in there. And we can't have enforcement with Bitcoin. There is no central authority to enforce anything. So all we've got left is to trust that everyone will behave selfishly. So you've got to make sure that that selfish action also happens to line up with what's best for the system overall. And in Bitcoin it does. But in most other things in the world, those things don't align. And so you get people that cheat.
Yeah.
And they benefit themselves, but it to the detriment of the greater good.
And this is why we'll never have more than 21 million coins.
Well, we'll never have
technically, yeah.
That's right. The game theory says that, again, a good example of the game theory. Why would any of the participants in the network agree to increase it?
Yeah,
because
we
everyone
can technically do it, but
they can. Yeah, but why would I want to? Why would I want to debase the money that I hold?
I've got fiat for that.
And take something like Ethereum, though, with their proof, or I don't know, pick on Ethereum, anything with like a proof of stake mechanism. The game theory doesn't align, because here's what happens. All of the people that have got all of the people that actually have the resource, in this case the token, can decide that, well, what if we just make it that everyone who has more than this number of tokens gets extra? They could do that, right? They could do it. They could, if you had a controlling supply, you could all get together and just make a rule that benefits only those people that have the controlling supply. Whereas with Bitcoin, there is no, it doesn't allow any kind of tyrannies of the majority. So it's like a kind of like a system that it's a constitutional republic. There's a constitution of 21 million, and it's those. And even if you've got a very small part of the supply, with you can't get trampled on by the people that have the majority of the money. Through anything that might just benefit those people to the detriment of the poorer people in the system.
Yeah.
Proof of stake systems don't have that, because it's like the whole way there. Those things are literally voted on by how much of that thing that you have. So those systems don't align very well for everybody. That's not a system that if you were coming in new, that you should feel very comfortable about getting on board with. You don't think that there's no, you've just got to trust that the people that own the majority of it are going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But that's not aligning with their incentive to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So I hope, at least by example, it might make that a bit clear. It's not an easy subject.
Yeah.
But it is a very important one to at least have a basic understanding of, to see why Bitcoin differs and works versus many other things that try to change the game theoretic model around.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
put the incentives in different places.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I wish I learned about it when I worked in did service design. I always thought incentives were important, but I feel like I could have gone a little bit deeper. But anyway, I want to pivot a little bit, and I wanted to ask you if you personally know of any Bitcoiner that's also a central banker. I know that's a very specific question, but I'm asking because I feel like there's so many people in Australia as well as globally that work in banking, they work in traditional finance, and they're full-blown Bitcoiners. I haven't come across one yet that's a central banker.
I don't know that I can't say I know many. I mean, I know of central bankers, but I mean, how many central bankers can most people name? I'm not sure that that's
It's very
kind of like
specific.
the question doesn't exactly pop up at the pub trivia. It's name 5 central bankers. I mean, it's the sort of thing I think that if they did own it, they probably wouldn't want to be too public about it.
Do you know what? I find that with a lot of people. So when I came out of the closet on LinkedIn last year and started talking about Bitcoin, I've had colleagues, like ex-colleagues that I worked in the past, sheepishly come up to me. It's like, by the way, I'm all in on Bitcoin. Or I really like Bitcoin. I've been in it for years. And they just keep it very quiet. They don't like any of my posts because they don't want to be associated. It's like their dirty little secret. I think that's going to change soon. Even Jerome Powell said that it's becoming a mainstream thing. But I was curious to ask that question. I'll tell you why. Is because I really want to know about the mindset of these people. Do you know what I mean? Like I want to know their mindset of like, I want to get inside their brains and understand what they think of Bitcoin. Like, what do they think of it? I'm sure they've heard of it. I'm sure they have an opinion on it. Do they still think it's a scam? Do they think it's disruptive? Are they scared of it? Like, I want to know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure opinions vary between them. But you may well find if you do get inside the head that there's quite a wide spectrum of views on it. I think there probably are some people very naively that think that it's some sort of scam, but that's an incredibly obtuse position to be taking after this length of time. You'd have to literally have not even looked at the first one thing to think that after this length of time all these years that you couldn't get off that. That's the most rudimentary kind of objection that you could make. I would think even central bankers would be a little bit more sophisticated in their objections than that at this point. Um, I think their main objection is that they would consider it. They would probably say things like, if they did still object, would be things like, well, it's not backed by anything, and they'd use sort of, again, these are just as tired, and these are just still
Yeah.
bad arguments, but they're a little bit more they're a little bit take a little bit more nuance to defeat than just saying it's a scam. Like, it's very easy to say this is a scam. Okay, where's the entity that that's putting this out? Like, who's the who's the thing behind it that's doing it if it's a scam? How's that? I think at this point it's more of like a lot of what blockchain was about was the attempt to kind of that's kind of actually where blockchain actually really came in. Like, when that came in, there were a lot of central banker types and fiat money types that really jumped on that blockchain, not Bitcoin bandwagon, because that's how it was originally presented. They would say this was their kind of way of dealing with it. If you want to really get in their heads, and this is
It makes
where
perfect sense, yeah, because they want to keep what
that
they're
was
doing.
actually their way of dealing with it. They would say that, oh, well, the technology underlying Bitcoin is interesting. We just don't think that currency is valid, that we don't need that currency. And so that's why you've got the central banking types taking an interest in things that they could, how they might be able to leverage some of this blockchain technology, the use in central bank digital currencies. So if you think for a minute, like, a lot of people tried to, we're all on the same side. No, we're not. A lot of the blockchain crowd is very much interested in how they could apply blockchain, but it isn't even necessarily blockchain, it's just fintech. But they're in the sort of blockchain communities, how they can use it to be the bedrock of government mandated central bank digital currencies. That is so the central banker types are quite potentially interested in blockchain, and have been for a very long time, and even like Ethereum, for all of its origins, it for a long time has its proponents have been vying for it to be, as I say, the bedrock of government mandated central bank digital currencies. They would love that, because it's just got it's a centralized enough thing for them to be able to try doing something like that on there. So these other things could not be more antithetical to what Bitcoin was created to avoid the need for in the first place. We don't need central banks. Central banks are the problem that we are solving for. Not here to be something that like makes central banking more effective or more at what it does. I don't want central banking to become more effective. It's effective enough in terms of what it can do, in terms of censoring people, in terms of locking down, controlling people, doing all of those things that that we saw them actually try to do. Like, we saw them actually flex this power throughout the COVID hysteria period. They flexed this on people. They even, after the January 5th business in Capitol at the Capitol building in Washington DC, they even tried to like shut down Donald Trump's banking accounts. That literally tried to get the guy, like, to remove the guy, take the guy's whole ability away to operate in the banking system. I mean, if they could try to do something like that to him, imagine what they would do to just an ordinary citizen or someone who didn't toe the line, who didn't agree with whatever the latest prevailing narrative was. I wouldn't be surprised if those attempts to remove Donald Trump from the banking system were potentially an orange pilling moment for Donald Trump himself.
Oh, 100%. I think even Eric said that he got debanked, and that was one of the main reasons why he got into Bitcoin. I'm
Can't
pretty
do it
sure
on a
was he.
Bitcoin standard.
Yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah,
A lot of these things. That's the point I made as well the other night at that thing. I said all of these things that have happened on crypto and are happening in the fiat financial world. These bad things, terrible things, you can't do it on a Bitcoin standard.
yeah,
Because those bad things were the very problems that Bitcoin was solving for.
yeah. Do you think
Important
it's easy?
problems.
Yeah. Do you think it's easier to get crypto people to switch to Bitcoin or complete no coiners? Who do you think is easier to
Oh, crypto
grasp?
people.
Yep,
I think
yep,
crypto people, because crypto
yep,
people are, no coiners have taken a kind of, a no coiner is a fairly extreme position actually.
yep,
There's actually two extremes. There's the extreme no coiner position. Those people don't believe that there's anything here at all. They don't believe in Bitcoin, crypto, blockchain, none of it. There's nothing here at all. It's like, to them, it's like, it's gold bars. It's like, which they somehow still, most of them still think somehow backs the fiat currency that they love. For them, there's that. They're the no coiners. They just can't get themselves around the idea that there could be another unit of account. They're going to be permanently stuck in that sort of dollar fiat mindset.
yep,
Then there's the other extreme, which I actually put to be the blockchain crypto and people. They think that this stuff can do anything. Not only is it, it can polish issues and wipe your ass. And they haven't run out of ways of thinking about what it can do. They're always sitting down trying to think of more, trying to find more problems for this solution that they've got to solve. I put them at the other extreme. I've always said that Bitcoin was the sensible, moderate position. It wasn't the maximalist position, although we say what Bitcoin Max is. The maximalist position was to say that somehow this tech was like, you could pull bits and pieces of this tech apart and use it for anything. We make the relatively modest position, the relatively modest proposal that it can be used to solve for money and make essentially finish the idea of what money is. Like, there's been many ways of doing money throughout history that have improved upon it, some of which has improved on earlier versions. Now in the 21st century, what we need is we need it to be electronic so that it can be passed down a wire, but anything electronic can be infinitely replicated. It can't be guaranteed to be scarce. So people then are saying, oh, we'll have to go back to a gold standard. But a gold standard, because it's physical and cumbersome, is what led to a fiat standard in the first place. If you go back to a gold standard, you're just going to end up back at fiat again, because because you can't send gold down a wire. So you have to represent it with a ledger entry in a database. So then you start trading ledger entries. And ledger entries, you can make up whatever number you want and put it in the ledger.
yep,
Bitcoin combines the scarcity of gold with the electronic nature of fiat money, and finally marrying the two together, and now money is all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be. You don't need any further improvement. It's like the ballpoint pen. How many different types of writing implement did we go through? Ballpoint pen was invented in like the 1950s. Still here, That's the 1950s. That was done.
yep,
And there's lots of other examples. And so too, again, going back to looking at Bitcoin as the monetary phenomenon rather than the tech phenomenon, it's done. Apart from tinkering around the edges, it's done. There doesn't need to be another totally new system. There'll just be some minor refinements made to Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin you yourself hold, that's it now. That's the money.
I have another question. Because you've been in Bitcoin for a while, and you've learned so much along the years, but do you find that you're still learning a lot about Bitcoin even after many, many moons?
Oh yeah. Look, there's so much to learn, and there's so much I still need to learn. I mean, certainly on the more technical levels, yeah. I mean, there's just there's. I don't think one person can't even really cover it now. Like, there now has to be specialization within Bitcoin, let alone Bitcoin people talk about Bitcoin was a speciality in itself in a wider range of different things, but now you have to have specializations within Bitcoin, and in order to be sort of get any kind of, if you were going to try to have any kind of career in Bitcoin, or you really have to have a niche in Bitcoin and be good at just that niche. If you can be good at just that one thing, at that one niche, you can do well in Bitcoin. But as for needing to know, like, yeah, and that will never end, like, for everybody. It's like that Dunning-Kruger, like, what is it? The Dunning-Kruger
Yeah.
type. You know, like you're going to go up, you're going to have that mountain of Mount Stupid, and then as you come down
Yep.
off the other
I'm
side, your
I'm at the
confidence.
bottom. I learned so much last year and at the beginning of this year, and I'm like, wow, I just don't know anything. There is so much
Yeah,
more I need to learn.
that's
Yeah.
it. And that's the realization. If you've come to that realization, that means you actually do understand, like, at least the extent of the information out there. The most ignorant
Yeah.
position is actually thinking that, like, yeah, this is all there is, and I know all that now, so that's it. Hey, no.
Yep.
Um, that's where, you know, a lot of these people, like your Senator Rennick and things like that, to go back to him, that guy
I
has never
messaged
come
him
down off the
earlier on
peak of
today.
Mount Stupid on any topic his entire life.
I messaged him earlier on today on Instagram. I mean, I commented on because he posted another thing. He was ripping at banks and talking about how the ownership behind the big four is all elusive, and I was like, I commented on that post. I was like, I really think you need to give Bitcoin a chance. I'm like trying to let him know in every single
No, but he
channel on
thinks he
Twitter and
already knows it.
Instagram.
No, no, I've studied Bitcoin. I have this degree in this, and I went to here,
He
so
doesn't
I already
understand
know
it.
all there is about that. That's the peak of
No,
Mount Stupid.
he does not
He doesn't
understand
need
it.
to look at Bitcoin because he's already
Yep.
looked at it. He knows he knows the whole thing. There's nothing. There's nothing you can tell him.
He
Peak of
read
Mount
about it in the
Stupid, and
Financial
that's going to
Times.
be. Sorry.
He read about it in the Financial Times.
Whatever. Yeah, I mean, he knows. He knows everything. There's nothing more. Nothing more you can tell him.
That
And
was my
I
favorite week. Yeah, sorry, that was my favorite week in Australia. When like, it's
and
like I there was it went global. It was just
it
circulated
did,
all
yeah.
over, and so many different like media companies published it, and it was so funny. And Pete Rizzo as well retweeted it. It was the best week in Bitcoin Australia. I should take some screenshots before it's all taken down.
Oh yeah, yeah, I guess so. I suppose it's mostly unless people delete their tweets, but I won't be. I'll leave mine up because I think I wasn't that upset to have someone like that though necessarily not be on our side because if you had heard that guy ever speak on other things, um, it, it wouldn't bring us great credit to be able to point and say, oh look, this guy agrees with this. Yeah, but that guy's an idiot. Like
Yeah.
I want there needs to be like if you heard this guy speak on other matters, it's like there's a Senate inquiry. Like, look, I might agree with his political positions on a few things, but the
Yeah.
arguments he deployed in defense of that position was so laughably ignorant that they actually argued against the position that he was taking because they were just so easily shot down by opponents of that position.
Yeah.
So you don't want someone like that arguing in favor of Bitcoin and putting forth completely stupid, boneheaded, absurd type arguments for it. Make us all
Yeah.
look stupid.
Well, he wasn't re-elected, so he's gonna, I think this is his last month
Irrelevant.
as,
Exactly,
yeah.
irrelevant. And hopefully the conversation. See,
I
remember as well,
liked
when you
him.
debate.
I liked him. I liked that he questioned RBA on gold audits. Yeah, I feel like he did a few good things. So
Absolutely, I agree, but not going to be he's not going to be an effective champion of any of the causes he stands for, though, because unfortunately, he just doesn't have the ability.
mm,
But and of course, and the tragedy of all of that is he thinks he already knows everything, so never going to he's never going to improve on his knowledge of a topic because he's delved as deeply as he thinks there is to
mm,
go.
yeah,
But however, I don't necessarily think it's futile arguing against such people because remember, whenever you're getting into a debate online with somebody about something, your aim shouldn't necessarily be to convince that other person because quite often that other person is completely
yeah,
immune to reason, allergic to reason almost. But remember that there could be thousands of other people reading it. So that back and forth, that argument, there's a whole lot of people that really don't know where to sit. I do that too. Like when I don't know something, I just often sit back and read the arguments backwards and forwards, and eventually, like you read it backwards and forwards, and eventually a position emerges that clearly makes more sense than the other one. And so
yeah,
you can learn a lot just from reading the debates and staying well
yeah,
out of it while you make your mind up. And so that could therefore, having those debates with someone whose mind you're not going to change, is still performing a service for the audience. It's now the audience you're trying to convince, not your opponent.
Yeah. Yeah, there was some great, and really, as soon as we end this call, I'm going to be taking some screenshots of the rebuttals before they get taken down. I'll put them in the history book of Australian Bitcoin because, yeah, I got to give some credit to Konza as well. He had some really good comebacks. To him, it's like, sir, do you know what money is? Yeah. What else? Oh my gosh. Okay, I just realized what time it is as well. So, um, where can we go from here, JP?
Well,
Wait.
maybe I could just point out, maybe just a quick shill of the meetups, that sort of thing,
Yes.
Bitcoin activities. Let's do that. So many of your Australian listeners probably already heard me mention this on other podcasts as well. But I host the Bitcoin Sydney meetups. So we've had that going it's been going since Stefan Lavera, Harry Raab, and myself established that back in 2018, I think it was, as an explicitly Bitcoin only meetup in the face of the fact that everything else had gone sort of crypto and blockchainy. So this was the first of the explicitly Bitcoin only meetups that was in Australia, and relatively early for the world as well. We realised that it was necessary to fix the scene, because it was, the conversation had gotten very derailed, not just with crypto, but with Bitcoin forks and things like that as well. And that has proven to be a model that others then have gone on and created Bitcoin only meetups around the country. When there's now a sort of a full lot of Bitcoin meetups meeting not just in the capital cities, but I think you mentioned as well,
Regionally.
Northern Rivers. Yep.
Yeah. The
And
Australian
even
Bitcoin body lists all the locations around
there we go.
Australia, and
Yeah. So rather than I
each
won't
time,
rattle them all off again. Straight
yeah,
perfect Australian Bitcoin industry body. I host also the Parks Bush Bash. So there is 4 Bush Bashes a year, which are events that all Bitcoiners from all around Australia join in on. And the New South Wales one is held in Parks. It'll be on again at the end of November. So I hosting that, and what else? I think, and of course, as far as the Sydney meetup's concerned, we also have socials around the northern beaches, western suburbs, southern suburbs. Again, as you mentioned, Anya, it's all on the Australian Bitcoin Industry Body website. Bayani does a great job with that, and he's also the host up there at the northern beaches, as well as co-host down in Sydney here. So, yeah, so plenty of things. If people are just watching this and you haven't gotten yourself around to a meetup, don't be intimidated. Particularly, I think we were talking about the women in Bitcoin things earlier on before the
yes,
podcast, Anya. I'll let you maybe talk about that. But
yeah,
as far as the meetups are concerned, they're not like intimidating, like technical type things. We have separate things for that. If you want to go down that technical route, there's also Bit Devs that Alex Hanley in Sydney here is. Where was that? I went to one of those over at Chatswood last night. So there is that. Smaller groups focusing on technical stuff. But these are designed to be for new people and seasoned Bitcoiners to all get something out of it.
yeah. But on the women in Bitcoin, yeah, we spoke about that earlier on, and I wanted to mention, like, since I started hosting some women in Bitcoin events, we've had, a lot more women join the scene, and I describe myself as like the gateway drug to Bitcoin. Quite often, women will be part of the online chats or the community, but they don't actually go out to meetups because I don't know, sometimes it's a practical reason, like they've got kids and a family to look after and can't make it to a Bit Devs thing on a pub in a pub. But other times, like, they just find it a lot easier to sort of break through if a woman is hosting an event or if a woman is organizing an event, because they will come, see that it's a really friendly crowd. Everyone wants to help you learn. Everyone wants to, offer as much knowledge for free as possible, because that's how we are like. And yeah,
Yeah, so that's
quite
what,
often
because
those women end up joining the main
which is
meetups. And
because I
yeah,
think that was, as I was saying before, I thought was because there's been a few arguments like, why have we got to have separate women things? Like nothing's ever happened to a bad to a woman at a normal mixed meetup. What's the problem? I guess though, from the point of view of people who haven't been to the scene before, they don't know where to start. it provides that initial thing, and then they realize, okay, well, I've come to that. Now I can just come. It's not so intimidating. I can just come now to the normal meetup. We don't, so as a way of potentially getting people involved that might have had trepidation beforehand. Because, and by the way, I don't think the other point we were talking about before is how the people that sort of say, oh, why are we having separate women things? Like, I don't think those people have anything against women having their own events. It's just that our society has made it sort of taboo for there to be male-only spaces, and so it's therefore, well, why can't we have it? I think people are all the people that have sort of said that they don't like the idea of sort of these separate women things are perfectly fine with it if they could also weren't being frowned upon by the existence of male spaces, which has all been essentially been in many cases drummed out. And I think there are situations due to the inherent and differences between men and women that we shouldn't feel awkward about acknowledging. That means there are times when you want to have potentially separate things. Just don't say that it's okay for one, but not okay for the other, I think.
Exactly. No double standards, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have had that question before, and it's like, I just kind of answered honestly, sometimes it's easier to speak to other women. Sometimes
and of course, as I said, once those women come to those things, they find there's no problem. They can come along like the normal meetups. There's no, they're not intimidating. There's not going to be like creeps there or any whatever other kind of...
No creeps in Bitcoin, I promise you. But I did remember while we were speaking, I also wanted to ask you, you traveled recently to South Korea. You went to Seoul, did like a conference, you were on a panel. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, that was great. So yeah, again, thank you to the organisers of that. I was so we had a member in Sydney. It was Spectre. His screen name is. He's developing a way of. He's part of a development team that's, I think, trying to make the Bitcoin node essentially run on a phone by having a sort of hash of the blockchain on there. I don't want to get too deeply technical. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but that's the project. And he was in Sydney, and he was also in very close with the organisers at Bitcoin Seoul, and invited me. He said, would you like to speak at Seoul? And so I haven't been to Korea before. What better way to experience a new country than do it and with a bunch of other Bitcoiners? And so they're all going to be in town. And so I went along to that, and I basically hosted a panel on the first VIP day about Bitcoin communities. And had a conversation. We had a conversation with representatives from El Salvador. There was another one from Indonesia. It's Key Pleb from Indonesia.
Oh yeah, Key Pleb.
Key Pleb, yeah. He was from Indonesia, and we had Arthur from the Bitcoin Association of Hong Kong, and I think it was Roman from El Salvador. So yeah, 3 terrific Bitcoin communities, and with me from Bitcoin Sydney. And we just discussed ideas of the various ways in which some are creating circular economies and the challenges they face in terms of how they keep shitcoinery out of their community. That came up. A bunch of other things, but overall it was a great experience. It was in a magnificent location on the 76th floor of the tallest building in Korea, which was, I think, the Signal Tower, I think it was called. Massive building. So it was over 3 days, and had a chance to check out a few of the other usual tourist sites in Seoul. But very impressive country, very much like what I haven't been to Japan, but what I would expect. I've heard Japan is like very high trust, very clean. Everything works. Everything is really well thought through. People very, courteous and polite as a whole. It's like that. It's like what you get when you got this sort of homogenous, high trust society, where you genuinely do have a sense of community. I remarked when coming back to Australia, is very much you don't really feel now in Australia that there is an Australian community or an Australian culture. We are now just essentially a random collection of fungible economic units, replaceable with more fungible economic units. It could just keep being imported from overseas in order for the government to prop up the GDP at the expense of the per capita GDP of everybody who already lives here. That's all we are. We're not citizens. We're just fungible economic units You walk out your door. I imagine what goes through the head of tourists who come here now. They're probably wondering, like, where is this Australia? It's like this. It's just like it's so generic. It's like
Mm,
there's no discernible, culture of people here or national traits whatsoever.
yeah. I think you need to come to Northern Rivers because
That
it
still
is,
exists. No, I agree. It still exists. I
yeah,
think
I
in
love
more.
it. It's like
Yeah, yeah,
Australia 30 years ago.
yes,
It's like,
yeah.
I remember before I decided to come and live here, I was impressed to see so many families, like dad with two kids riding a bicycle with no helmet down the
Hmm.
road. It's like, it's optional. You can choose a helmet, you can choose not to wear a helmet. No one's going to police you. The people are very freedom minded. They're very, the government here feels like they're here to serve the people, not the other way around. It's just a beautiful place. Like you
Yeah.
can
No, I
have a
think what I
lemonade
said just then was
stand
all very.
without a permit.
Yeah. What I said then, of course, is a very much a capital city centric view.
Yeah.
But I think even in Brisbane, it's probably still much like it was decades ago. But how long that will last, I don't know, because the present government that we have, and indeed, I don't think it matters which side you vote for. They're
Yeah.
on the side of the people that donate to their coffers, which are businesses, large businesses, who the only way when you're a business like a Wesfarmers and a Coles, and between you, you've already pretty much got 100% of the market share of the country. Then how do you increase the size of your business? Increase the size of the population. You don't like that's all you got to do, and you'll take as many people. You will be pushing for as much immigration as you can, and you won't. And it doesn't matter to you how that the people that already live here now can't buy a home because you've the demand side pressure that you've put there
Yeah.
has so greatly exceeded the supply side. Because the average person looking to buy a home is not a political donor. It's not donating to the Liberal. In fact, these political, maybe a lot of people probably know this, but the people that are the political donor class don't just donate to like their preferred party. They don't donate to Liberal or Labor. They donate equally to
Yeah.
both, and then they
Yeah.
threaten both. They then threaten to withdraw funding from one of them if they don't get what they want out of whoever it is that wins. Again, a terribly bad bit of game theory there in a system designed that way. Again,
Mm.
very, because that's the thing. So you donate to both and then withdraw, then leaving then only the other side can then outspend you. So therefore, whoever gets in will do what you say, and
Yeah.
and it just kind of sucks for everybody else.
Yeah, I saw a stat the other day. It's a really bad problem. So ABS released a report. Basically, they said that in Western Australia, in particular, since 2019, rents have increased by 75%.
Hmm.
75% in
Yep,
6 years.
6 years. Yeah,
Um,
that's
I didn't
way
see what the
beyond
other
any
states
published
were, but
inflation rate. It's
yeah,
yeah, that.
we're in price control territory. It's like I don't
And then that
know what
brings up
needs
a
to
whole bunch
happen
of
for
problems.
things. Yeah, I
Hmm.
really don't know what needs to happen to fix to fix the country from here, but I'm very concerned about where it's headed.
That is a whole
It is,
debate within the Bitcoin community. I speak to like a lot of Bitcoiners I speak to, and some say, look, they're not just gonna surrender the country to the communists, they're gonna stick around. And others are saying, screw this,
yeah,
I've got Bitcoin, it's portable wealth, I can just pull up stumps and take it all with me and spend it
get
into some
taxed to
economy where
death
I'm
on your
not
way
gonna
out.
right, yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Potentially. If unless they defer it,
yeah,
in which case it potentially be deferred to the never never.
yeah,
I'm
which
not,
many people have.
you'll do your own, and some people may even decide that if they don't intend to ever return to the country, then just leave. Like I don't know. Like I'm not suggesting people do this, but I'm just trying to imagine what some people might say they would do. Is just, well, I'm not even going to come back. What? Just take my Bitcoin and leave. Yeah, what are they going to do? And it's like they can potentially, like they did with Paul Hogan, like if you didn't declare a capital gain upon exiting, they could get you when you go back into the country. So you got to think of that. But otherwise, some people may well just decide to say, "Screw this, I'm going," and they go and live in a better much more favourable tax jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Hopefully there'll be some game theory there that'll make governments decide, hey, we're losing. And that's what's happening as well in other countries. They're
Yeah.
losing millionaires.
UK's
They're losing. And
UK's
this is not the first. This has happened in many other countries. They lose.
Mm.
And these are the people that are already shouldering the majority of the tax burden. So you lose those people, and you have to increase taxes even more on those who remain, which then incentivizes more people to leave. So there's an ideal point on the Lafleur curve, I think it's called, where they say that the ideal amount you can tax before you disincentivize people from creating anything that can be taxed in the first place. But, these are problems that I think Bitcoin can help us solve. I think once Bitcoin, you can... it is very hard to confiscate from people. It's not unconfiscatable. You can be held, and then as long as they've got you, they can potentially coerce you into... That's where sort of treating Bitcoin privacy is very important. That's a whole topic that we often deal with at Meetups. You can maybe in future podcasts get people on to talk more deeply about those aspects. But there are many tools available to help increase your privacy in Bitcoin, because there are many reasons why, not just that you might not want all and sundry knowing what your Bitcoin holdings are, not the least of which is your own personal safety.
Yeah.
And there are certainly tools that will enable that.
I think that's a whole, you're right. That's a whole other podcast episode.
It is, yeah.
All right, well, let's wrap up here. Thanks so much for coming on, JP. I've really enjoyed having you on. I've learned a lot from you, so I'm very excited.
Terrific.
Right.
Well, all the best with the future podcasts, and looking forward to seeing who else is going to be on.
That's it for this week on The Honest Money Show. Big thanks to Bitteroo. Check out why more Aussies are choosing them at bitteroo.com.au. And shout out to our listeners on Fountain, where you can earn sats just by tuning in. If you appreciate the way we cut through the noise, you can support us directly via the QR code in the episode notes. Until next week, take care of yourself and your money.